Hello, everybody. So this is something that I think I talk quite frequently about because I find there's just such incredible importance to this, and this is um, moving beyond the mind. What that is, what that means, how the purpose of it, the utility of it. So in the teachings of Vedanta, and more with Advaita Vedanta, non-dual, right? You can see this in Zen, Advaita Vedanta, Tantra, yogic practices, right? The journey from this realm of mind and ego to the realization of the Atman, or the that which is beyond the mind and is eternal. Not in a dogmatic or a religious manner, but this is something that's realized through subjective or personal exploration deep into oneself, questioning oneself, questioning one's mind, questioning one's physicality. So the Atman is portrayed as kind of this ultimate dissolution of suffering. So the mind is this relentless weaver of thoughts, desires, fears, and it creates a web of illusions that entangles us in a cycle of this pain and pleasure, which are intimately connected here. So the ego with its constant assertions of I and mine, or I think like Beatles, right? They say I, me, mine all through the day. I, me, mine. I, me, mine. I, me, mine. Right? If this sense of I, me, mine, it deepens this suffering by clinging to transient identities and experiences. But I think when we transcend these limited constructs and come to this realization of the Atman, or this true self. We say true self because it's not transient. It doesn't change. It doesn't shift. And this doesn't dismiss or suppress these notions of self, which is a mental construct. It's just we're attempting here to move past these mental constructs, these emotional constructs, these thought constructs of the mind, which is a limited construct, and attempting to enter into something which is unlimited and not a construct, but a truth, an ever-present truth within existence. So we encounter the state of pure being here, where suffering, it organically dissolves like mist in the morning sun. So the mind, with its capacity for reasoning, creativity, and perception, it's a wonderful tool, right? But it's also the source of much suffering when we attach a sense of identity to it. So it thrives on dualities. It's its purpose. The mind is a tool for the self to use. The mind is not the self, right? The mind is a tool for the self to express itself through. This is why we can say my mind, subject, object. The subject being the self, the object being the mind and its contents. So, like I said, it thrives on these dualities, and it constantly categorizes experiences as good, bad, desirable, undesirable, right? This kind of thing. And this perpetual judgment, it breeds dissatisfaction. It has to breed dissatisfaction, right? The mind forever seeks something more or different than what is present. And remember, this is the mind's job, right? It's a tool, and it's a magnificent tool. It's amazing, right? But the sense of ego, which is the attachment of one's identity to the contents of the mind, it forms this sense of separate self when we attach the identity to this. And it personalizes these judgments and experiences, and this leads to a false sense of identity, right? So this false identity is tied to the ego, and it generates fear, attachment, and aversion, right? All of these things are definite key ingredients to suffering here. And so many spiritual traditions see the ego as a primary obstacle to enlightenment. So this sense of enlightenment means to recognize and understand one's self beyond this sense of conditioning. It's a subjective experience. It's a personal experience. There's not a dogmatic formula which is put out for anybody to follow. But there are some tools that can be utilized. But it has to be a personal experience. We have to move through it on an individual level. There's a sense of responsibility and accountability in this progression to enlightenment. And the ego's sense of separateness here, it fosters this endless cycle of desire and aversion, right? And it's deepening our entrenchment in this suffering itself. And as long as we identify with that ego, with the contents of the mind, meaning we reflexively or unconsciously form a sense of identity around the contents of the mind, we remain caught in this cycle. And this is we experience life through the lens of separateness and limitations here, right? We have to, when we identify the self as this. So in the philosophy of Vedanta here, Atman is the innermost essence of our soul as an individual, right? So it is the true self, beyond the physical body, beyond the mind, and beyond the attachment of one's identity to the mind or the ego. So the Atman is eternal, unchanging, and indivisible. In these kind of non-dualistic schools of thought, realizing the Atman is synonymous with realizing one's unity with Brahman. So Brahman is, we could say, existence itself. Right? This isn't formed around ideas and notions which are formed in the mind of what existence is, but rather beyond the definitions which the mind will create, and we view existence and embody ourselves within existence itself. So this is that sense of Brahma. It's undefinable. So the closest we can say is the Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. So that is still, those are words, right, that are created as a pointer towards this ultimate reality, right? So our mind can't comprehend it. So this realization, it's not just an intellectual exercise, but it's this profound, transformative experience that transcends the limitations of the mind and the ego here. It's the awakening to one's true nature, which is pure consciousness, pure bliss, and a sense of pure peace. So this journey to transcend the mind and ego, it really requires dedicated practice and this deep commitment to spiritual growth. So there are a lot of different paths and practices that facilitate this transcendence, right? Like meditation, self-inquiry, devotion, ethical living. So we could say jnana yoga, which is knowledge, right? Proper knowledge and right knowledge. Bhakti, which is this devotional practice, and karma, which is the action. So we really should be merging all of these together. We really should be merging all of these in a way that makes sense with us. So the right kind of educational stance. This means educating ourselves of this supreme, of the infinite, right, cosmological and beyond the cosmological structure. We should be educating ourselves in ways that make sense to us at this time. And bhakti, or devotion, we should be forming these devotional practices in ways that make sense to us, right? But that also is applied to something much more vast than ourselves, vaster than our mind. And this means more vast than the material cosmos, right? Move ourselves in that direction continually. And karma yoga, or you could say action or service, right? Service is a really great way to put this, in a way which makes sense with us. And putting all of these things together, we'll be on the right path for ourselves, right? So with meditation, and through this meditation, we cultivate the ability to observe the mind without attachment. So that's the first step here. So this practice reveals this kind of transient nature of thoughts, emotions, and it reduces their power over us. So over time, meditation leads to a state of this inner stillness where the deeper self can be experienced, and we can abide within this sense of deeper self and view the contents of the mind and the body as they move through us. We recognize that the contents of the mind and the reactions within the body have been conditioned responses, right? They have to be. This is what the body and mind are. Conditioned responses, accumulation of information through the sense organs, right? Through the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, right? Through the sense organs, going into the mind, forming impressions and merging them with previous experiences, right? Which are biased and prejudiced, right? Meaning they're limited to our own scope of what we assume reality to be, and reinforcing this view of reality, which just furthers one's own conditioning, right? Even if it is expansive, right? There may be less suffering within an expansive state, which there definitely is, and more suffering within a constricted state. So if we have a constricted worldview and a constricted view of ourselves, meaning we have a lot of anxiety, a lot of tension, maybe depression, fear, I don't know if I said anxiety here, but all of these kind of emotional states that are very constricted, and we know they're constricted because our bodies feel this constriction, and we are taking in information from the world, from others, from the environment, from our familial, our families, from societal, from institutional, right, modalities, and we're taking in this information, and they are merging with our already constricted perspective. We accumulate more constricted perspective. So we have to work on expanding ourselves. And meditation can really assist with expanding oneself and expanding our view, therefore expanding our perspective. And when information is coming in through the sense organs, it is adding to this expansive perspective. And it really assists us with looking at the contents of the mind and the idea of this formation of oneself with more clarity and depth and vision and progression. Another thing we look at here is like this self-inquiry. So this kind of practice of self-inquiry, it involves continuously asking this question: who am I? What am I? Right? And by turning the mind inward and examining this source of I, we peel away the layers of false identity and come to rest in the pure awareness of the Atman. So the sense of I, when we look at this, it's not that we say, oh, I am a teacher, I am a father, I am a clinician, I am, right? These are roles, right? The I comes before these roles. So when we're looking at who am I, we're not merely analyzing one's roles or a sense of character or the feelings which may arise. We go beyond that, right? At first we may identify with these things and say, I am a homeowner, I am a male, I am, right? But these, remember, there's I am, so there's subject and object. We want to just engage with the inquiry of the subject. So what is this I without any object attached? So explore this. What is this? Right? What is this sense of I without an object attached to it? And the utility in this is we slowly dissolve the objects which we have identified with. So it doesn't mean we no longer are a father. We become more of a father, right? Because the role in which we were ascribing value to it now expands beyond the limitations of the definition which we have given it. So there's a great utility in that. The next thing is devotion, or we call it bhakti, devotion. So devotional practices like prayer, chanting, surrender, right? And this is all a subjective experience. So whatever it means, whatever prayer means to you, and that feeds a sense of interconnectedness, right? Chanting, mantra, surrender, right? This is the surrender to a higher sort of power, whatever that means is to you, right? It's not a dogmatic perspective, but keep expanding that. So if your idea is, surrender to the idea of energy or the cosmos, don't stop there, because stopping at that point, it only creates ideas and ideals within the mind, which you then cling to, convincing oneself that it is the expansiveness, the infinite expansive. But if you're stopping at a particular kind of notion or idea of something that you are surrendering to, you are now limiting the infinite to the confines and boundaries of a mental construct. You want to move beyond those mental constructs. We want to say, the devotion that I have, yes, I am starting with the cosmos, but I should not stop there. I want to dwell within that with the understanding that I am going to move beyond that, whatever that may be. And we don't ever stop. We don't stop with this sense of expansion. Remember, we're moving towards the infinite. The infinite has no boundaries. So through this devotion, we shift our focus from the limited self to the divine or the infinite. And this leads to the realization of the Atman. This is a very important thing to ponder here. So when we hold a notion of what something is, so when we say, I know what Brahman is, right? I know what the infinite is. You don't. You can't. This is infinite. By attempting to understand what something which is infinite is, you're limiting it to a mental or emotional construct, right? And if something is a mental construct, it is not infinite anymore. You can't define something which is infinite. It is just an infinite progression into the infinite. And that is devotion. This is what we work towards here, right? So as we progress on this spiritual path and begin to experience the Atman here, a really profound transformation occurs, right? The mind's incessant chatter quiets, the ego's grip loosens, and in the presence of the Atman, suffering loses its foundation. It has to. We've expanded ourselves beyond that which has created suffering, so suffering loses its foundation, right? So suffering is fundamentally a product of ignorance here. So ignorance of our true nature. So when we identify with the mind and the ego, remember the ego is this attachment to a mental construct. This could be an unconscious mental construct or a conscious mental construct, right? So when we attach ourselves to this and identify with that, we call it the ego, we live in a state of separation and lack, constantly seeking fulfillment in these external circumstances. And right, it's an endless seeking, which is the root of our suffering. But when we realize the Atman here, this infinite expansive sense of self, which lay beyond this mental construct, we see that the Atman is pure awareness, and it's untouched by the fluctuations of the mind and the ups and downs in life here, right? It's the state of our pure being. There's no room for suffering in that, right? And it's not a construct anymore. It's beyond a construct. And as soon as we find ourselves forming a construct of what this Atman is, we have to recognize that construct, right, as a sense of conditioning which is going to lead to suffering, let it go, and move into that expansive, infinite realm of oneself, right? So we come to understand that suffering was a product of our false identification with the transient aspects of existence. And the experience of the Atman transcends words or concepts here. So it's direct, intuitive knowing that goes beyond the limitations of language and beyond thought. So, speaking with those who have realized the Atman and having had specific different experiences, right, we can see that the Atman is described as the state of profound peace, equanimity. I'd say it's equanimous. It's calm in the face of adversity, right? It's unshakable. It's boundless love, unshakable bliss. Like I said previously, it would be described as the words that would describe it, but they can't encapsulate it. It only points towards it, but points in a very direct way, is Sat Chit Ananda. Sanskrit, Sat Chit Ananda. Existence for the sake of existence. Consciousness for the sake of consciousness. And bliss for the sake of just bliss. Not of something. If of anything, then resting within itself. And this infinite consciousness, it underlines all of existence. And this realization brings about a fundamental shift in perspective. We no longer see ourselves as isolated individuals struggling against the world, but as integral parts of not just the universal consciousness, but infinite consciousness. Remember, we can't limit this to something and say universal consciousness. The universe is matter, right? Matter has a beginning and an end, right? It's incredibly expansive to us. But resting in the infinite, our cosmos is a grain of sand on an endless beach. So this shift in perspective dissolves the boundaries between self and other, and it leads to a deep sense of interconnectedness and compassion. So in this state, our actions, they're no longer driven by these egoic desires, but flow, right? And they flow naturally from a place of love and harmony. Namaskar.